Hello, welcome back to Bonaventure Time. I am so pumped for today. I know I've kind of been making videos and I've been, I go surface level, introduce them, maybe do a history. Um, I want to start diving into texts more deeper. The Edith Stein video I made on Stein's theory of empathy versus Sartre's theory of the look was received more better, or I don't know the right word. It was just more successful, it seemed, than just surface level introductions to different philosophers. So I really want to dive deeper into texts. And one of the texts I want to dive deeper into is Love and Responsibility. And this is one of my favorite works in philosophy. It's priceless. It's just has so many great things that you can pray with, that you can reflect on, that you can critically think about, and I think it's just a wonderful presentation on love, and in a philosophical sense, and he really borders onto the theological and the sacramental aspects, especially in marriage. Really quick before I get too carried away with this, I know I mentioned I'm making an existentialist video. That has not been released yet because I recently started researching more into another existentialist I was not too familiar with, and I thought they presented more intriguing thoughts that might help illuminate the existentialists as a group. So I'm going to go back and remake that video and add this existentialist in. So that's why it's not out yet, but that will come eventually. And then I have one on Bonaventure coming out soon as well. Okay, so to Wojtyla and Love and Responsibility. This one I've alluded to parts of this in previous videos. If you've I think the personalist vision in the eyes of Wojtyla, Hildebrand, and Stein, I mentioned parts of it. But there is just a lot here, and it's dense, it's very rich, and so I don't really want to just breeze past this. I want us to take our time with this. I want to dive deep into it, and I really just think that this is a text worth diving into and reflecting, and even if it takes longer, it's one of those books that you don't just want to read and just read as fast as you can. You really want to take your time, just read little chunks, and just reflect on it and pray with it, and see what he's saying and try to get to the deeper meanings, right? So I encourage you to read this. It makes it more accessible, and it might help illuminate what I'm going to say about it. But yeah, if you do take up to reading it, I encourage you not to just breeze past it. I encourage you to really sit with it and pray with it. Also, that being said, with how dense it is, I want to make this a series of videos on love and responsibility because there's just so much here, and I don't want to end up making a 1 hour or 2 hour video, or honestly past 3 hours, because it's well worth it to dive into 3 hours of this and much more. So I've already talked a lot about how Wojtyla, in other videos, I've mentioned this, that Wojtyla starts this book talking about a difference between subject and object, and how we are both subjects and objects. In a way, there's really a deviation from this theory of the look from Sartre, and these theories of ambiguity and existentialist ethics and gender theory from Simone de Beauvoir. So you see that already. I'm not going to really go into that, but I really want to go into the person and this personalistic principle that Wojtyla lays down. I believe I've mentioned this already in other videos, especially in the personalist vision, but I wanted to kind of talk more of a philosophical basis for this and kind of where he wants to lead this in the direction of love and responsibility. So Wojtyla, in writing this, is responding to a couple philosophies that I think would be adequate and maybe not adequate, appropriate to mention to help kind of reveal more of what he's trying to do here. One of these is Kantianism. This is coming from Immanuel Kant, and I've mentioned him briefly in my video on modern philosophy. For Kant, he was trying to respond to this rapid determinism that was growing in his age, right? Modern philosophy saw a huge shift towards determinism, right? This return to the mechanists and the atomists, and especially in Democritus. right? So we're seeing this sense of material determinism. We see it in Newtonian physics, right? If you can um, take all past principles and you predict their future outcomes, then take all the past principles of man, predict all his future outcomes. So we see this determinism, right? And Kant is responding to that. And Kant writes a lot on freedom, and you see this in his ethics and his aesthetics, right? The critique of pure reason, the critique of the power of judgment. And what Kant does is he develops a principle that the person is not a means, but the person is an end in themselves. And what he means by that is we have autonomy. We have the freedom. Like, right, if you know his motto, right, two things that fill me with awe and wonder are the starry skies above and the moral law within. And for him, right, you see an aesthetics with the starry skies, but you also see the ethics with the moral law within. For him, the law is not relative, but it resides within me. It's a subjective universality that he says we have, right? And you see this in his aesthetics as well, where I have these faculties and I make a judgment, and that judgment becomes a maxim law for everyone. And it's similar in his aesthetics with judgment of beauty, the judgment of taste. And what he's doing is he's giving autonomy to man to show forth freedom, that I have this freedom to choose. I'm not merely a means to an end. I am the end. Now, Kant, and we'll see this in just a little bit when I go into the text of Love and Responsibility, keep that in mind. Kant says that we are the end and we have self-autonomy, but he says we're not a means, but we are the end. So keep that in mind. I'll come back up. Another philosophy that Wojtyla is going to respond to is utilitarianism. And this is already diving a little bit into the text, but I won't go to quotes in there because it's pretty, it can be pretty easily understood, the premise of utilitarianism. Utilitarianism has at the root of it in Latin uti. Uti means pleasure and using, right? To utilize something, but it also means for pleasure. And what this is it's not something as crude as to say John Stuart Mill developed utilitarianism to say we need to maximize our pleasure, like food, right? All these things, power, wealth, any sort of bodily pleasure, right? He's not suggesting that. What he is, he's actually returning, and again, right, modern philosophy returns, they reject Aristotle and they return to post-Aristotelian philosophies and pre-Aristotelian philosophies. One of those is the Epicureans. Epicurus developed this philosophy very similar to utilitarianism, and it's this idea of avoiding pain and maximizing pleasure. But again, it's not something as crude as lower bodily pleasures. It's actually this pleasure of the soul, this tranquility of the soul. And so Mill is actually going to kind of adopt something similar to the Epicurean philosophy. And what he's going to say is we got to calculate the greatest kinds of pleasure, right, for the soul. And again, calculation becomes a big principle in utilitarianism because they're trying to get to the greatest end for the greatest amount of people, right? Greatest pleasure for the most maximized amount of people. And so you have to calculate what are these pleasures that I must sacrifice. This is Epicureans as well, but Mill will take this up as well. What are the pleasures I must sacrifice, and what are some of the pains I must accept in order to get to a greater pleasure, right? And so we see that at the heart of utilitarianism is this grand calculation towards the end. And what they also do is the end, because you're so focused on the end for the greatest amount of people, the ends justify the means, right? You see this in totalitarianism. There we go. That's a hard one to pronounce. Consequentialism, right? Teleologism. All these different things. Even fundamental option theory has these premises of utilitarianism in it. So those are big concepts in utilitarianism, where it's a calculation, it's very calculative, and the ends justify the means. Okay, now that we have these two different philosophies, Kantian ethics and a utilitarian ethics, which I should mention, Love and Responsibility is actually an ethics work. These are, right, there's critiques between both authors of these different philosophies within. Because we see Kant saying we're not just means to an end. we are the end in ourselves, but Mill's going to propose something that can allow for humanity to be a means to an end in order to maximize a pleasure, right? So they're in opposition. Is Wojtyla going to favor utilitarianism, or is he going to favor Kantianism, right? Because I already said he's critiquing utilitarianism, so is he just going to favor Kantianism? No, he's actually going to critique utilitarianism and perfect or refine what Kant missed or what Kant did not conclude. So his critique of utilitarianism, and I'm going to pull a little bit from Veritatis Splendor, which is one of John Paul II's encyclicals, I believe is 1993. One of his critiques of consequentialism, which is the main one he's critiquing, but all other utilitarian kind of heresies, is that this calculation, this grand calculation, is impossible, right? Because utilitarian is going to suggest we have to make this grand calculation in order to define the best means to get the greatest end for the greatest amount of people. John Paul II is going to critique that and say, this grand calculation is not possible. How can I really make such a grand-scaled calculation of all these means, of all these ends? And, right, it's impossible. That's one critique. And that is implicitly in Love and Responsibility, but I think it's even more visible in Veritatis Splendor, which is why I reference that more so than Love and Responsibility. Another one, into this idea of pleasure, right? Because if we're going into the realm of ethics, especially within the realm of love, in a philosophical notion, is Wojtyla going to just suggest then in critiquing utilitarianism there's no such thing as pleasure, right? In the aspect of love, right? In the aspect of sexual ethics? No, he's going to make a distinguishment made by Augustine between two Latin words, which is uti and frui, right? Uti is this pleasure, and frui is this enjoyment, this delight in something. This is actually mentioned in Hildebrand in his Aesthetics. He makes this distinguishment as well, or really I should say he's taking it up from Augustine. And what he uses it for Hildebrand, he uses it towards beauty, right? Beauty is not just this self-satisfaction, right? This gratifying experience. His theory is beauty is this value, right? This something he learned from Max Scheler, but actually differed from Max Scheler on because he developed a different value system. That's the realm of axiology. If you see kind of these values, axiological, I am having trouble pronouncing things, axiological theories in Love and Responsibility, that's what that is. That's a background, right? Because Wojtyla kind of takes a lot from Hildebrand. So beauty is this value, right? And instead of just this self-gratification, which is actually a Kantian aesthetics, right? Or Kant actually battles that as well. He holds that beauty is not just this satisfactory self-gratification, right? This pleasure. It's something we delight in. And in the same way, Wojtyla is going to use this in the aspect of love, right? It's not just this utilization for pleasure. It's going to be something we delight in. That, of course, there's going to be some form of pleasure, but it's going to be a higher form. It's going to be delighting in something, right? Whereas, right, Hildebrand would call it value apprehension and then value response, right? This is something what Wojtyla is going to suggest in love, right? It's not pleasureless, but it's this higher delight, this frui. So I know that's a lot. We just talked a bit about Kantianism and a bit about utilitarianism. So we talked a lot about how Wojtyla is really countering utilitarianism and kind of the view of how he wants to take this ethical view of love. And he's departing and critiquing utilitarianism. There's still the Kantian idea, right? Because Kant's going to battle Mill in his own way, right? And say, right, I already mentioned his aesthetics. He battles this idea of self-gratification. And in his ethics, he's going to put the person in autonomy and say they're ends in themselves. What is Wojtyla's take on the Kantian idea? Does he just go Kantian? No, but he mentions them, and it's very important in understanding Love and Responsibility and where he's taking this. So on page 27, Karol Wojtyla says, it may not be irrelevant to mention here that Immanuel Kant, at the end of the 18th century, formulated this elementary principle of the moral order in the following imperative. Act always in such a way that the other person is the end and not merely the instrument of your action. Alright, so, right, what I was talking about with Kant making this autonomy towards man, that's what Kant's doing, giving autonomy. Wojtyla continues, in the light of the preceding argument, this principle should be restated in a form rather different from that which Kant gave it, as follows. Whenever a person is the object of your activity, remember that you may not treat that person as only the means to an end, as an instrument, but must allow for the fact that he or she too has, or at least should have, distinct personal ends. This principle, thus formulated, lies at the basis of all human freedoms, properly understood, and especially freedom of conscience. Okay, I know that's a lot, and there's more I want to get into with this, but I'm going to try to make these videos about 20 minutes long. So what's that difference there that he said is not merely a means, but as having personal ends? Well, what Wojtyla is suggesting with that is actually quite interesting. Sorry, I'm just switching to the next page I want to get to. I think too far ahead. All right. Wojtyla is mentioning, right, they're not merely a means to an end, and they have their own, but it must account that a person has their own distinct personal ends. What's the difference? Why is he reformulating Kant's principle? And is it important? Yes, it's actually really important, because Kant, right, in saying that we are ends in ourselves, right, we are the end, Kant is giving autonomy to man. But Wojtyla making this distinction, right, he's upholding his critique of utilitarianism in saying we're not just merely a means to an end. But he's also saying he says we account for distinct personal ends, what he's showing there is we can be loved for our own sake, but we are not the end, right? God is the end. God has autonomy. We just have distinct personal ends, and that is why we cannot be used merely as means to an end, right? The moral law isn't just something that is a maxim that resides within me. The moral law is something that dwells in my heart, written there by God, right? And this is what Wojtyla is saying, and that's why he reformulates Kant's principle. And it's a massive distinction, right? Because he's giving autonomy back to God. And this is imperative to understand love and responsibility, because if God, right, if you have the vision of God and authority given back to God, then there's an illumination on the true aspect of what is love, and then we can reveal what is human love, right? Because if you work backwards, it doesn't work, right? Because God is love, the image of love. So we have to give authority, we have to give, right, autonomy to God, right? Give him all that authority, restore that image of love, and then comes revealed the image of love for humanity, right? The greatest love expressed in marriage, right? And so that was a massive distinction that Wojtyla was making. And what he would turn it into is what we call the personalistic norm. And this is one of my favorite things of Wojtyla. It's a great norm. And he compares it to the command to love. And a lot more can be said on this, and I'm getting close to ending this video, and more will be said on this, but I want to end at least mentioning the personalistic principle. How Wojtyla is going to make his own ethical stance, right? He's going to take an ethical stance rooted in, I should say, Thomistic grounds, but also in personalistic norm. So this is how he combats utilitarianism, and this is how he still puts a priority on the subject and responds to Kant as well. So, in developing this norm, right, he's building off this, people are not merely an instrument and a means to an end, but, right, they have their distinct personal ends. How he's going to relate this to love is expressed beautifully on page 41. So I want to read this quote. In its positive form, the personalistic norm confirms this. The person is a good towards which the only proper and adequate attitude is love. I'm just going to reread that again because it's just so beautifully written. In its positive form, the personalistic norm confirms this. The person is a good towards which the only proper and adequate attitude is love. And this is, again, I'm going to pick off in the next video and unpacking this more, but I just want to talk a little bit and introduce you into this norm. So he's talking about a response to the person. The person's a good response that is only adequate for this good is love. And this personalistic norm he's referring to, I believe I've mentioned it in another video on the personalist vision in the eyes of Wojtyla, Stein, and Hildebrand. What this norm is, it has two sides, a negative and a positive principle. The negative principle is what we've been talking about, right? This response to Kant. A person is not merely a means to an end, not merely, and I'll expand upon this in the next video. A person is not merely a means to an end for another. The positive formulation of that is a person must be loved for their own sake, right? Why? Because we have these personal distinct ends, right? We are good, right? Not dependent, not relative to one another, right? Like something Simone de Beauvoir would suggest. But we are good, right? We must be loved for our own sake, right? Like in a sense, in it of itself, but that ventures a little close to Kantianism, right? There's this distinction here that's made, loved for their own sake, excuse me. And that's the personalistic norm. And he's going to really compare this to the command to love in the gospel, right? Love God, love neighbor. And why he's going to compare it is this idea of justice, right? This ethical standpoint. And also just this command to love, this hermeneutics of the gift, this receiving the other as a gift, right? For their own sake. That's venturing more into theology of the body, though, and we're going to stay kind of in the realm of philosophy here. So we're going to end there. We're going to end with the personalistic norm, its positive and negative formulation, right? To kind of recap, we kind of talked about Kantianism, utilitarianism. Where is Wojtyla standing? How is he critiquing utilitarianism? And how is he really perfecting a Kantian view of the person? And we also introduced the personalistic norm and how important it is to orient love to the other person in a sense of justice, but this has to be revealed to us by giving autonomy back to God. So this is where I'm going to end the first video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you do, please like it, please share it, and I'll make another video and we'll continue our journey through love and responsibility. God bless.